first letter came through my door at 4 minutes past 3 in the morning, and I know the time exactly because I was already awake and because the brass flap lifted and set itself down again as gently as somebody closing a door on a sleeping child. I lay there with my hand flat on my chest, and I listened. No footsteps running, no car, no voices, just that small metal sound, and then the house going back to being a house. When I finally went down, there was a white envelope lying face up on the mat in the hall, square to the edges of it, the way you would place a card on a table if you wanted somebody to notice it in the morning. No stamp, no postmark, just a name in beautiful old handwriting, the kind they beat into people at school 70 years ago. Mrs. E. Marsh, Rosemead, 9 Pell Street. My name is Adele. I have never been called Marsh in my life, and the house I had just bought, the first house I have ever owned on my own, in 62 years of being alive, did not have a name on it. It had a number and a green door and a brass mail slot that somebody had polished for a very long time before I got there. I want to be careful how I tell you this, because for a long time I got it wrong. Not a little bit wrong, completely wrong, in a way that I still think about at 3 in the morning when the house is quiet and the flap does not lift. So I am going to tell it to you the way it came to me, the way it built. And when we get to the part where I found out what was really happening, I want you to notice something with me. I want you to notice the one small detail that was there from the very first night, the one thing that never fit, the thing that would have told me the truth in week 1 if I had been able to hear it over the noise of my own fear. Let me go back a little. I moved to Pell Street in the March. My husband Gerald had died the previous spring, and by the autumn I had understood that I could not stay in the house we had shared for 31 years. It was not grief exactly. It was the size of the rooms. Everything in that house was built for 2 people, and I kept walking into the second half of it. So I sold it, and I bought a small terraced house on a quiet street on the far side of town, and I did it entirely by myself. I chose it, I signed for it, I paid for the survey and argued about the boiler, and I did not ask a single man for permission. I was so proud of that. I want you to know that, because of what happened after. For about 11 days I was prouder of myself than I had been in decades. Number 9 had belonged to an old lady who had died. The estate agent said it in that careful voice they use, as if death were a small stain on the carpet they were hoping you would not mind. She had lived there 50-odd years. Her family had cleared it and repainted it magnolia and left the good brass fittings, because you cannot get brass like that anymore. The door was solid wood, painted dark green, with a knocker and a mail slot set low, and the slot had a spring in it that made it close with a soft double note. Tack, tock. I remember thinking it was a lovely sound. I did not think that for very long. The first letter, as I said, came on a Tuesday night in April, 3 weeks after I moved in. I did what anybody would do. I told myself it was for the previous owner. Mail comes for dead people for years, everybody knows that. I put it on the shelf by the door, and I went back to bed, and I slept badly and blamed the wine. In the morning I looked at it properly, and the first small wrongness arrived, and I ignored it. There was no stamp. There was no franking. There was no postmark. Nobody had posted this in a post box. Somebody had walked to my door in the dark, in person, and put it through by hand. I decided it was probably a neighbor, somebody clearing out old papers, finding a letter that had gone astray years ago, dropping it round rather than binning it. People do kind, slightly odd things all the time. I put it back on the shelf. 4 nights later, the flap went again. This time, I was properly asleep, and it woke me. Same sound. Tack, talk, and then, faintly, the gate. Our gates on Pell Street are iron, and they all stick, and they all make a scraping complaint when they swing, and I heard it scrape closed. Closed, mind, not left open. Somebody had shut my gate behind them. I got to the window in time to see nothing at all. The street was empty and orange under the lamp, and there was a shine of rain on the pavement, and that was it. Downstairs there was a second envelope on the mat. Mrs. E. Marsh, Rosemead, 9 Pell Street. Same hand, face up, square to the mat. And that is when the cold came into me, and honestly, it never really left, because 2 is a pattern. 1 is a mistake, and 2 is a decision. Somebody had chosen my door twice. I did the things you do. I checked the locks. I checked the back door and the kitchen window, and the little window in the downstairs toilet that does not shut properly. I sat on the stairs in my dressing gown until it got light, and at 7:30, I rang my daughter. Carrie lives 90 miles away with 2 teenagers and a job that eats her. She was kind about it, and she was also, I could hear, slightly relieved that it was such a small thing. "Letters, Mum. It is letters. Probably some confused old dear down the road." She was closer to the truth in that first phone call than I would get for another 2 months, and neither of us knew it. By the end of April, there were 6 envelopes on my shelf. They came at odd intervals, never every night. Sometimes 2 nights running, and then 5 nights of nothing, which was worse, because the nothing nights were when I lay awake waiting, always between about 2:30 and 3:15. Always the same name. Always that careful, sloping, beautiful handwriting, the loops on the M and the H like something off a wedding invitation. I started writing the times down in the back of my diary. Once I started, I could not stop, and that is when I crossed over from a woman with an odd problem to a woman with a project. I want to be fair to myself because I have been unfair to myself since. Here is what it looked like from inside my hallway. A stranger knew when I was asleep. A stranger came to my door in the dark, repeatedly, and did not knock, and did not speak, and did not want anything from me. A stranger used a name that was not mine, which meant either they did not know who lived here or, and this is where my mind went, they were pretending not to, and I had just moved in alone. 62, widowed, no dog, no man, no alarm. If you were choosing a house on a street of houses, you would choose mine. That thought got into me like damp gets into a wall. Slowly, and then everywhere. I rang the police on the 2nd of May. A very polite young woman took the details and asked whether anything had been stolen or damaged, and whether the person had tried the door or the windows, and I had to say no, and no, and no. She said she would log it. She used the word log about 4 times. She suggested I keep the envelopes, and she suggested a camera, and she said that, unfortunately, delivering letters is not in itself an offense. I put the phone down, and I felt the particular shame of being a woman who has rung the police about paper. That was when I started doing my own work. The bin was the thing that turned it, I think. That was the night my fear stopped being general and got specific. On Pell Street, the bins go out Thursday night for a Friday collection. I had put mine out at about 10, the way I always did, and I had gone to bed, and at 10 to 3 the flap went, and in the morning there was an envelope on the mat. And my bin was back inside my gate, in the yard, tucked in beside the drain pipe where I keep it. I stood at my front window in my nightdress, and I could not make my hands stop. Somebody had come through my gate. Not to my door, which was already unbearable, but into my yard. They had picked up my bin and wheeled it in and put it in the exact spot where I keep it, which meant they had looked, which meant they had been in my yard before, which meant they had been watching long enough to know where the bin lives. I could not think of one single innocent reason for that. Not one. A stranger comes into your yard at 3 in the morning and quietly does one of your household chores. There is no version of that which feels like kindness when it is happening to you at 3 in the morning. I put the chain on the door, and I did not go out that day. The next week, I got worse, and I want to tell you honestly how much worse, because it matters. I bought a torch, one of the heavy metal ones. I bought 2 floodlights on brackets and got a man in to fit them, and they lit the front of my house up like a filling station and made the woman opposite come round and ask, quite reasonably, whether I could angle them down a bit because they were coming through her bedroom curtains. I told her somebody was targeting my house, and she said, "Oh," and stepped back a little, and I saw her decide something about me. I stopped saying good morning to the man at number 15 because he walked a lot at night. I looked hard at a teenage boy from the top of the road until he crossed over, and I put a hair across the door handle. That one I got off the internet, and if you have never been frightened in your own home, You will think it is silly. You lick a hair or a fine thread, and you lay it across the handle and the door frame so that it sticks. If anybody turns the handle, if anybody so much as tries it, the thread breaks or falls. I did that every night for 11 nights, and on 4 of those 11 nights, a letter came through my slot. The thread was never broken. Not once. Not one single time in 11 nights. I noticed that. I want to be clear that I noticed it. I stood there in the cold hall at 4 in the morning with a torch in my hand, and I saw that fine dark hair still lying across the handle exactly where I had put it, and the envelope on the mat behind me. And do you know what I did with that information? I decided it meant he was careful. That is what I did. I took the single most reassuring fact available to me, and I turned it into evidence that the man was a professional. He did not try the handle because he is patient. He does not try the handle because he is not ready yet. He is building up to something. Fear is a translator, and it only knows one language. Everything I fed it came out the same way. I did the flour next. I read about that too. You sift flour or talc very lightly over your front step and path last thing at night. A dusting, nothing anybody would see in the dark, and in the morning you read it like a book. The first 2 nights, nothing. The third night, the flap went at 20 to 3, and in the morning I opened my door with my heart going like a bird in a box, and there it was. Footprints, coming up my path from the gate. Big ones, a man's, with a soft, flat tread. No pattern in the sole to speak of. Up the path in a straight line. Then, a mess of shuffling on the step itself where he had stood for a while. And then, the same footprints going back down the path to the gate. That was all. He had not gone left into the flower bed. He had not gone right along the front of the house to look in my window. He had not gone round the side, and the side gate has a bolt on it that squeals, and the bolt was still across. Up the path. Stand on the step. Back down the path. There is nothing in that. I want you to hold on to that because I could not. A man who is casing a house walks the perimeter. He looks in windows. He checks the gate at the side and the fence at the back and the state of your locks. That is what casing a house is. This man used the path. Only ever the path. Like a person who had been told to keep off the grass. But by then, I was not reading evidence. I was reading a story I had already written, and in my story, the shuffling on the step was the worst part, because he had stood there. How long does it take to put a letter through a door? 2 seconds. He had stood on my step long enough to leave a churn of footmarks in flour. I decided he was listening at my door. That is when I stopped sleeping properly at all, and that is when I did the thing I am most ashamed of in the whole of this. I want to tell this part carefully. It was the 18th of May. I had been awake since about 1, sitting on the 3rd stair from the bottom in the dark, in my coat, because the hall gets cold. I had the metal torch across my knees. It is about 14 inches long, and it weighs more than a bag of sugar. I had thought it through the way you think things through at that hour. If the letters were a countdown, and I had decided they were, then one night the letter would not come, and the door would come instead. And I had told myself, out loud, in my own hallway, that if that door moved, I would not scream and I would not run upstairs. I would swing. At 8 minutes to 3, I heard the gate scrape. I heard slow steps on the path. Very slow. Uneven, actually, a drag on one side. I remember thinking, he is limping, he has hurt himself, and being savagely pleased about it. Then he was on the step. I could hear him breathing through the door. That is how close he was, and how quiet the street was. I stood up. I got both hands on that torch, and I lifted it up level with my shoulder, and I stood 2 feet from my own front door in the dark, in my coat, waiting. And the flap lifted. Tack. And the envelope came through, and it landed by my foot, and the flap went down. Talk. And then he did not go. He stood there. And after a moment, I heard him say something, very low, the way you talk when you do not expect an answer, and the wood took most of it, and what I heard was, "Night then. Night then." And then the slow, uneven steps going back down the path, and the gate scraping shut, and me standing in my hall with a torch over my shoulder and my whole body shaking so hard I had to sit down on the floor. I did not sleep at all after that. I sat in the kitchen until the birds started, and I thought about what I had nearly done, and I decided that it did not matter, because he was dangerous, and because next time I would do it. That is the woman I had become in 7 weeks. In my own home, the first home I had ever chosen for myself. Carrie came down that weekend. She took one look at me and made me eat, and she went out and bought a camera. I had refused to get one, and I know how that sounds. I think the truth is I did not want to know. As long as it was a shape in the dark, it was the shape my fear had made, and there is a horrible comfort in that. A camera makes it a man, and a man might be somebody I would have to look at. She fixed it under the little porch overhang, angled down at the step, and she showed me twice how to see the clips on my phone, and wrote it out on paper as well, because I said I would not remember, and then she went home. The first 4 nights, nothing came. Of course they did not. On the 5th night, the flap went at 3:10, and I did not go down. I lay there and I let it lie on the mat until it was light, because I had a camera now, and I did not have to be brave in the dark anymore. At 7:30, I made a cup of tea I did not drink, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I opened the clip. It was black and white and grainy, and the timestamp said 3:08:41, and for a second, there was just my empty step. Then he came into the frame. He was old. That is the first thing, and it went through me like cold water. He was an old man. He was wearing a raincoat over what I could see were pajama bottoms, and on his feet he had slippers, the tartan kind with the flattened backs, and they were soaked through and dark. He had white hair that the rain had stuck to his head. He was carrying the envelope in both hands, held up against his chest, the way you carry something you are frightened of dropping. He came up the path very slowly, dragging the left leg a little. When he got to the step, he stopped, and he looked up at the door, and he stood there for a long moment. And then he did the thing that broke me, and I have watched it more times than is good for me. He straightened the doormat with his foot. It had got skewed, the way they do. He nudged it square with the side of his slipper. Then he bent forward, and he lifted the flap of the slot with 2 fingers, carefully, so that it would not bang, and he posted the envelope through, and he did not let go of the flap. He held it and let it down slowly. Tack, tock. Then he put his hand flat on the green paint of my door, near the top, for about 3 seconds. And he leaned his head in a little and said something I could not hear on the recording. And then he turned around and shuffled back down the path in his wet slippers and shut the gate behind him. I sat at that table and I made a sound I have not made since Gerald died. He never touched the handle. In 2 minutes and 11 seconds of footage, that old man never once put his hand anywhere near the handle of my door. I took my phone next door to Bev at number 7 because Bev has lived on Pell Street since 1979 and knows everything and everyone. I did not really have a plan. I think I wanted somebody to look at it with me. She watched about 10 seconds of it and put her hand over her mouth. "Oh," she said. "Oh, that is Douglas Marsh, 81 years old, the son of Eileen Marsh, who had lived at number 9 for 53 years and died in the back bedroom of the house I now slept in, 2 years and 4 months before I moved into it. Douglas had grown up in my house. He had come home from school to that green door in the 1950s when it had a nameplate on it that said Rosemead, before the council made everybody use numbers. He had gone away and married and worked at the sorting office for 30 years, which is where the handwriting came from, and he had come back to Pell Street every Sunday of his adult life to have his dinner with his mother. He lived now in a flat on Barrow Hill, on the other side of town, with his daughter Fran popping in twice a day. Bev said, "But he has not been well." And then she said, in the way people do when they are choosing words, "He has been getting muddled." Barrow Hill is 3.5 miles from Pell Street. I have measured it since. There is a main road and a railway bridge and a long stretch with no pavement on one side. He had been walking it. In the dark. Sometimes in the rain. In slippers. Fran came to see me on the Wednesday. She sat in my front room, which had been her grandmother's front room, and she looked at the walls a bit, and then she cried, and then she apologized for crying, which women of my generation and hers always do. She had known he was going out. She had not known where. She had found mud on the carpet in the mornings, and a coat that was wet when it should not have been, and she had put a chain on his door, and he had learned to work the chain. She had been to the doctor about it twice. She had been told that he was on a list. And she had found the letters, or the beginnings of them, on his kitchen table. Dozens of them, written out in that lovely sorting office hand, every one of them addressed to his mother at the house where his mother had lived for 53 years. Because in the part of his mind that still worked, that is where his mother was, and she would be worrying because he had not been round. He had never told her that Eileen had died. His mind had, at some point, quietly stopped filing it. I had 6 weeks of envelopes in a carrier bag under my stairs. 19 of them. I had never opened a single one because I had decided from the very first night that they were evidence and that opening them would somehow spoil them for the police. That evening, after Fran left, I sat on the floor of my hall with the bag and I opened them all in order. Dear Mother, I hope you are keeping well. The rain has come in at the back bedroom again, where the flashing wants doing. I will bring my ladder on Sunday. Do not go up there yourself. Yours, Douglas. Dear Mother, I have put your bin out and brought it back in. Do not lift it, your back will go. There is nothing in the paper. Yours, Douglas. Dear Mother, sorry I have not written since Tuesday. I have been very busy. Fran sends her love. Do not wait up for me. Yours, Douglas. Dear Mother, I've got you the pear drops from the shop on the corner, but I did not want to leave them out in the wet. I will bring them Sunday. Dear Mother, is the boiler man coming? I think it was Thursday. I will ring him if you like. I do not mind ringing him. Page after page of it, small print, careful lines, and you could see it going if you laid them out in order. The first ones were beautiful. By the 5th week, the letters had started to lean, and there were words crossed out, and one of them had the date wrong by about 40 years. I had watched a man's mind coming apart, one envelope at a time, on my hall floor, and I had read it as a countdown. Everything. Every single thing. The bin, which had terrified me so badly that I did not leave the house for a day, was a man doing his mother's chores. The shuffling in the flour on my step was an 81-year-old with a bad hip, standing in the cold, waiting to see if his mum would come to the door. The gate that was always shut behind him was a boy who had been told 100 times to shut the gate. Him only ever using the path was a boy who had been told to keep off his mother's flower bed. Night, then. He was saying good night to his mother through the door. And the thread across the handle, unbroken, 11 nights out of 11. Because it never once occurred to him to try the door. He did not want to come in. He was not asking to come in. He knew perfectly well that you do not walk into your mother's house at 3 in the morning and wake her up. He was a polite man from a generation of polite men, and he posted the letter, and he said good night, and he went home. That was the small wrong thing. That was the detail that never fit, and it was there in week 1, and it was there every single night after. The letters were always posted. They were never pushed, and nobody ever, ever touched the handle. A person who means you harm tries the handle. It is the first thing they do, and it takes half a second, and it costs them nothing. Every warning leaflet the police have ever printed says so. I had that fact in my possession, in my own hallway, verified by my own hand, 4 separate times, and I did not use it because it did not match the story I had already decided on. There is one more part, and I would rather not tell it, so I will. The last letter came on the 9th of June. That was 2 days after Fran came to see me, and I had told her, and she had said she was getting the door alarmed, and that a place had come up, finally, an assessment bed, and it would be that week. I heard the gate at about 10 to 3, and I got up, and I went and stood in my hall, in the dark, on the other side of my own front door, and I listened to that old man come up my path. And I did not open it. I stood there with my hand actually flat on the wood, level with where his hand would be, and I did not open it. I told myself it would frighten him. I told myself a strange woman opening his mother's door at 3 in the morning would be a cruelty. I have said that to myself for a long time now, and some days I believe it. The envelope came through and touched my foot. He did not say night then. He stood there a while longer than usual, and then he went. That letter was 4 lines. The writing was very bad by then, and it went downhill across the page. Dear Mother, I am very tired. I have been walking. I do not know why you do not come. Please open the door. He went in on the 11th. Fran rang me. The assessment bed became a permanent bed on a unit with a keypad on the door, and the walking stopped because they will not let you walk out of a place like that at 1:30 in the morning, and thank God for that, because the next winter would have killed him on that railway bridge. And the letters stopped. I did not understand, until they stopped, how much of my life had arranged itself around them. I still woke at 10 to 3. I lay there, and I listened for the gate, and the gate did not scrape, and the flap did not lift, and I would go down anyway, and stand in my hall, and look at an empty mat. Fear had at least been company. Silence was not. I went to see him in the August. I took the letters in a shoebox, because they were his and not mine, and I had some idea about handing them over and being forgiven. He was in a chair by a window in a warm room that smelled of gravy. Somebody had shaved him and combed his hair, and his slippers were new. He was perfectly polite to me. He asked whether I had come far. He asked it 3 times in an hour, and each time he was pleased to hear the answer. He did not know me. Of course he did not. He had never once seen me. I was the woman who lived behind the door. I asked him about Rosemead, and something moved in his face, and he told me about a coal cellar and a red rug and a plum tree in the back that his mother would not have cut down. He told me his mother did not like the wireless on after 9. He used the present tense the whole time, and I did not correct him, because what would that have been for? Before I left, I read him one of his own letters. The one about the pear drops. He listened all the way through with hands in his lap, and when I finished, he nodded and said, "That was very nice," and asked who had written it. I said, "A good son." He said, "Oh, that is nice," and looked out of the window, and I came home. He died the following February. I went to the funeral, and I sat at the back, and Fran found me afterwards and held both my hands and thanked me, and I stood in a church hall holding a cup of tea and could not think of one single thing I had done that deserved thanking. I still live at number 9. I have taken the floodlights down. I go and say good morning to the woman opposite, and she has been decent about it, more decent than I was. The mail slot is still there. I have kept it polished, which I do not entirely understand, and I keep the spring oiled so that it does not bang. And I have thought a great deal about what it was that went wrong in me, because I am not a cruel woman. I have never been a cruel woman. I think it was this. I had just moved, on my own, at 62, into a house I had chosen with nobody's help, and underneath the pride, I was frightened in a way I could not say out loud. I was frightened of being alone in a building at night. I was frightened of being a woman who had nobody to shout for. That fear was already in the house before the first letter came. It was in the walls with the damp. And then something came through the door, and the fear finally had somewhere to sit. That is the thing nobody warns you about. Fear does not wait for evidence. It arrives first, and then it goes looking, and it will find something, because there is always something. A man walking late. A bin in the wrong place. A stranger's handwriting. And here is what I would say to you, and it is the only useful thing I have. When you are frightened, and you are gathering up your little pieces of proof, look for the piece that does not fit. Do not throw it out. Do not explain it away. Look for the detail that argues with your story, because your fear will not do it for you. Your fear will take the kindest fact you own and turn it into a threat and hand it back to you, and you will thank it. Mine was right there in my hand for 11 nights, a single hair lying unbroken across a door handle. Not once. He never tried the handle. Not once in 6 weeks did that man ask to come into the house where he was born, because he had been raised not to wake his mother. I thought a stranger was learning my door. He was not learning it. He already knew it. He knew that gate sticks and you have to lift it. He knew the mat slides. He knew the flat bangs if you let it go, and that you have to bring it down with your fingers. He knew all of it because for the first 18 years of his life, it was the only door in the world that was his. And at the very end, when almost everything else had gone, that was the last thing left in him. He walked 3.5 miles in the dark, in his slippers, in the rain, to a woman who had been dead for 2 years, to tell her he had put the bins out. And I stood on the other side of the wood with a torch over my shoulder and called it a threat.